The gunshot echoed across the Montana plains like thunder, sending birds scattering into the dusky purple sky. Adelina Vaughn ran as though the devil himself chased her, her boots pounding the dirt, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her auburn hair, once neatly pinned, now streamed behind her, having broken free from its constraints like she had from her brother's cabin. The torn sleeve of her dress flapped in the cool evening air, exposing a fresh bruise that bloomed purple against her pale skin. Quinn Quincannon hadn't planned on company that evening. He'd been tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on his cattle, and now found himself watching a different kind of pursuit altogether. From his position on the ridge, he could see the woman stumbling through the sagebrush below, and not far behind her, 3 riders pushing their horses hard. The year was 1878, and in this remote corner of Montana territory, the law was whatever a man decided it was. Quinn had no interest in other folks' business, but something about the desperation in the woman's flight stirred something in him. When she fell, tripping over a rock hidden in the tall grass, he made his decision. He spurred his horse down the slope, dust billowing behind him. The 3 riders were closing in on the woman, who had scrambled to her feet, but was clearly exhausted. Quinn's Morgan horse thundered between them just as the lead rider was about to dismount. "That's far enough," Quinn called out, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. His Winchester rifle rested across his lap, not pointed at the men but ready if needed. "This ain't your concern, stranger," the tallest of the 3 men spat. "That's my sister and she's coming home." Quinn glanced down at the woman. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but her green eyes blazed with defiance. A fresh cut on her cheek told him all he needed to know. "Madam," Quinn asked simply. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They'll kill me this time." Quinn nodded once, then turned back to the 3 men. They were rough-looking sorts, with matching sandy hair and hard eyes. Brothers indeed, he thought. "The lady doesn't appear to want your company," Quinn said evenly. "I suggest you turn around and ride back the way you came." The leader's hand drifted toward his holster. "You've no idea who you're dealing with, Cowboy. That's Adelina, my sister. She's addled in the head, needs looking after." Quinn didn't move, but his fingers tightened imperceptibly on his rifle. "She looks clear-headed enough to me." "I won't go back," Adelina said, her voice stronger now. She stood straighter, though Quinn could see her trembling. "You've no right, Jasper. Father never meant for things to be this way." "Shut your mouth," the man called Jasper growled. "You'll do as you're told." "No, I don't believe she will," Quinn said. In one fluid movement, he swung down from his saddle, keeping himself between Adelina and her brothers. "In fact, I give you my word, they'll never touch you again," the middle brother snorted. Big talk from one man facing 3, Quinn didn't flinch. "I've faced worse odds." There was something in his voice that made the brothers hesitate. Quinn Quincannon was not a large man, standing just shy of 6 feet, but there was an economy to his movements, a stillness that spoke of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of. His sun-bronzed face revealed little, but his gray eyes missed nothing. "This isn't over," Jasper warned, but he made no move to draw his weapon. "Adelina, you're making a mistake. You know what happens to women alone in these parts." "She's not alone," Quinn said simply. A tense moment passed, the only sound the snorting of the horses and the whisper of the wind through the grass. Finally, with a curse, Jasper yanked his horse around. "Come on, boys, she'll come crawling back when she realizes what she's done." The 3 men rode off, throwing dark glances over their shoulders. Quinn watched them go, rifle at the ready, until they disappeared over a rise. Only then did he turn to Adelina. Up close, she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 22 or 23 to his 28 years. Despite the dirt and bruises, there was a determined set to her jaw that he couldn't help but admire. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. The evening was growing chill, and her thin dress offered little protection. "They would have dragged me back," Quinn nodded. "You're safe now." He shrugged out of his buckskin jacket and offered it to her. "Miss Adelina Vaughn," she said, accepting the jacket with grateful hands. "And you, Quinn Quincannon. Most folks just call me Quinn." He glanced in the direction her brothers had gone. Those men, they're really your brothers, Adelina's face hardened. By blood only. They stopped being family to me the moment our father died 6 months ago. She swayed slightly on her feet. Quinn noticed her exhaustion immediately. My ranch is about 3 miles from here. You're welcome to rest there until you figure out your next move. Adelina hesitated, clearly weighing her limited options. I have nowhere else to go, she admitted. But I won't be a burden. I can work, I can cook, clean, so Quinn held up a hand. We can discuss that later. For now, let's get you somewhere safe and warm. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Adelina sat stiffly at first, uncomfortable with the proximity to a strange man. But as they rode through the gathering darkness, her exhaustion won out and she gradually relaxed against him. They'll come looking for me, she murmured, half asleep. Quinn's arms tightened slightly around her as he held the reins. Let them come, he said quietly. They'll never touch you again, that's a promise. As the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Quinn guided his horse toward home, acutely aware of the woman whose trust he now carried. He was a man who kept to himself, a man with his own ghosts, and he had no intention of getting involved in someone else's troubles. Yet something told him that his life had just changed irrevocably, for better or worse. The ride to Quinn's ranch passed in silence. Adelina had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her body occasionally jerking with dreams or memories. Quinn held her steady, his mind working through the implications of what he'd done. Taking in a stranger was risky in these parts, especially one with trouble on her heels. His ranch came into view just as the moon cleared the mountains. It wasn't much a small, sturdy cabin, a barn, corral, and a few outbuildings, but it was his, built with his own hands after years of drifting. 2 years ago, he'd claimed this land, determined to put down roots after a lifetime of wandering. The light of a lantern glowed in the cabin window. Quinn frowned. He'd left no light burning. Mr. Quincannon? A figure emerged from the cabin. Pedro Alvarez, the 16-year-old boy who helped around the ranch. I was worried when you didn't return by sundown. Had a change of plans, Quinn replied, dismounting carefully to avoid waking Adelina. Once on the ground, he gently lifted her from the saddle. She stirred but didn't wake. Pedro's eyes widened at the sight of the woman in Quinn's arms. Who is? Someone in need of help, Quinn answered, his tone indicating that further questions would have to wait. Take care of the horse, would you? Inside the cabin, a fire burned low in the stone hearth. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a small table, a few chairs, and a settee covered with a Navajo blanket. 2 doors led to bedrooms, Quinn's, and a smaller one that had once been intended for a family he'd never had. Quinn laid Adelina on the settee, removing his jacket from her shoulders. In the firelight, her injuries looked worse. The cut on her cheek had stopped bleeding but would need cleaning, and the bruise on her arm extended further than he'd initially seen. He stoked the fire and put a kettle on to boil, then gathered clean cloths and a jar of the salve he used for cuts and burns. By the time Pedro came in from the barn, Quinn had a basin of warm water ready. Is she hurt bad? Pedro asked, his young face concerned. She'll heal, Quinn replied. Her brothers did this. Pedro made a sound of disgust. What kind of men harm their own sister? The kind we'll be watching for, Quinn said, his voice hardening. They might come looking for her. Pedro straightened, suddenly looking older than his years. I will help protect her. Quinn nodded, grateful for the boy's loyalty. Pedro had come to him a year ago, half-starved and speaking broken English, having fled a cruel ranch owner further south. Quinn had never asked for his story, just as Pedro never asked about Quinn's past. They understood each other. There's stew left, Pedro said. Should I heat it, please, and brew some coffee? She'll be hungry when she wakes. As Pedro moved about the kitchen, Quinn gently cleaned the cut on Adelina's face. She stirred at his touch, her eyes flying open in momentary panic. It's all right, he said quickly. You're safe, we're at my ranch. Awareness returned to her eyes as she remembered. How long was I asleep? About an hour. I'm just cleaning that cut. Adelina touched her cheek, wincing. I must look a fright. You look like someone who survived, Quinn replied simply. He dipped the cloth back in the water. This might sting a bit. She sat patiently as he finished tending to her wound, then applied the salve. Up close, Quinn noticed that her eyes weren't simply green but flecked with gold, like sunlight through forest leaves. "Thank you," she said when he was done. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. No need to think on that now." Quinn stood, giving her space. "Are you hungry? We've got stew." Adelina nodded, suddenly aware of her empty stomach. "Starving, actually. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Pedro brought over a bowl of stew and a cup of coffee. Adelina thanked him with a warm smile that transformed her face, hinting at the beauty that lay beneath the exhaustion and fear. As she ate, Quinn introduced Pedro and explained the basic layout of the ranch. "You can take the spare bedroom tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." "I meant what I said earlier," Adelina said between bites. "I want to earn my keep. I'm a hard worker." Quinn studied her for a moment. Her determination was evident, but so was her refinement. Her speech and mannerisms suggested an education beyond what most frontier women received. "You're not from around here originally, are you?" he asked. Adelina set down her spoon. "No, we came from Boston 3 years ago after my mother died. Father thought the West would offer new opportunities." A shadow crossed her face. "He was a good man, but too trusting, my brothers. They changed out here, or perhaps the wildness of this place just revealed what was always inside them." "What happened, if you don't mind my asking?" Adelina stared into her coffee cup. "After Father died, they took control of everything, the deed to our land, Father's money. According to them, as a woman, I had no right to any of it. I was expected to cook and clean and—" She hesitated. "They were arranging a marriage for me to a man 3 times my age who owns the largest ranch in the county. He has buried 2 wives already." Quinn's jaw tightened. Such arrangements weren't uncommon in the territory, but that didn't make them right. "When I refused, Jasper." She touched her bruised arm. "Well, you saw what happened. Tonight I overheard them planning to force the issue, so I ran. With nothing but the clothes on your back," Quinn observed. "I took my mother's locket and what little money I could find, about $20. She gave a small, bitter laugh. "Not exactly a fortune to start a new life with." "It's more than many have," Quinn said, "and you have your freedom." Adelina looked up at him, something like hope flickering in her eyes. "Yes, thanks to you, I do." The moment was interrupted by Pedro yawning widely. Quinn realized how late it had grown. "Get some sleep, Pedro. We've got work in the morning." The boy nodded and bid them good night, retreating to his small room off the kitchen where a cot awaited. Quinn showed Adelina to the spare bedroom. It was simple, a narrow bed with a quilt, a small chest of drawers, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. "It's not much," he apologized. "It's perfect," Adelina said sincerely. "I can't remember the last time I had a room to myself." Quinn nodded awkwardly, unused to having a woman in his home. "I'll find you something to sleep in, and tomorrow perhaps we can see about getting you some fresh clothes." "Thank you," Adelina said again, and Quinn wondered if he'd ever heard 2 words carry so much meaning. Later, after providing her with one of his clean shirts to sleep in and ensuring she had everything she needed, Quinn sat by the dying fire, cleaning his rifle. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Familiar sounds of a night on the frontier, yet tonight they took on a different quality. His solitary existence had been disrupted by the arrival of Adelina Vaughn, a woman running from her past. Quinn knew all about running. He'd done plenty of it himself before settling here. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the day's stubble. What had possessed him to intervene? It wasn't like him to get involved in other people's troubles. Yet when he'd seen her running, when he'd heard the desperation in her voice, something fundamental had shifted inside him. "They'll never touch you again," he had promised her. Words spoken in the heat of the moment, but he meant them. Whatever came next, he would keep that promise. With that thought in mind, Quinn banked the fire and retired to his own room, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for tonight, at least, everyone under his roof was safe. Dawn broke clear and cool over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Quinn had been up since before first light, checking the property boundaries. He'd found no sign that Adelina's brothers had followed them, but he wasn't taking any chances. When he returned to the cabin, he found Adelina at the stove, her hair pulled back, wearing the same dress from yesterday but with his shirt over it for warmth. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. "You didn't have to cook," Quinn said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Adelina turned, spatula in hand. "I wanted to, it's the least I could do." She gestured to the table where Pedro was already seated, eagerly eyeing the plate of biscuits. "I hope you don't mind that I went through your pantry." "Not at all." Quinn washed his hands in the basin, strangely moved by the domestic scene before him. "Smells good." They ate breakfast together, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. For a man accustomed to silent meals or the minimal conversation he shared with Pedro, the presence of Adelina changed the entire atmosphere of the cabin. She asked questions about the ranch, about the cattle operation Quinn ran, about the nearest town. "Cottonwood is about 15 miles south," Quinn explained. "Small place, but it has the essentials. General store, blacksmith, saloon, even has a proper doctor now." "And how often do you go into town?" Adelina asked. "When supplies run low, every couple of weeks or so." Quinn sipped his coffee. "I'll be heading in today, as it happens. We need flour and ammunition." Adelina straightened. "May I accompany you? I need to purchase some necessities if I'm to stay here for any length of time." Quinn hesitated. Taking Adelina to town meant exposing her to potential danger. If her brothers came looking, Cottonwood would be one of the first places they'd check. On the other hand, she couldn't remain hidden at the ranch forever, and she clearly needed clothing and personal items. "It might not be safe," he said finally. "Your brothers, I can't hide forever," Adelina interrupted, echoing his thoughts. "Besides, I refuse to let fear dictate my life any longer." Her expression was resolute. "I've been doing that for too long already." Quinn studied her, noting the determined set of her jaw and the clear gaze that met his without wavering. She had courage, this Boston woman. "All right," he conceded. "But we stay together, and if there's any sign of trouble, we leave immediately." Adelina smiled, the expression transforming her face. Even with the cut on her cheek and the lingering exhaustion in her eyes, she was beautiful. "I'll ready the wagon," Pedro offered, pushing back from the table. "Thank you, Pedro," Quinn said, "and while we're gone, keep a sharp eye out. Any strangers approach, you hide in the root cellar, understand? No heroics." The boy nodded solemnly, though Quinn could see he wasn't happy about being left behind. At 16, Pedro was eager to prove himself a man, but Quinn wouldn't put him at risk unnecessarily. Before they left, Quinn opened a locked trunk at the foot of his bed and removed a small Derringer pistol. He checked that it was loaded before presenting it to Adelina. "You know how to use one of these?" he asked. Adelina took the weapon carefully. "Father taught me the basics." He said a woman alone needs to protect herself. He was right. "Keep this with you just in case." Quinn showed her how to conceal it in the pocket of the coat he'd lent her. "With luck, you'll never need to use it." The journey to Cottonwood took most of the morning. Quinn drove the wagon, with Adelina beside him on the seat. They traveled through rolling grasslands dotted with stands of pine and aspen, crossing streams swollen with spring runoff. The air was fresh with the scent of wildflowers and sage. Adelina seemed to drink in the scenery, her face turned toward the sun. "It really is beautiful here," she remarked. "I never noticed before. I was always too afraid, I suppose." Quinn glanced at her. "It gets in your blood after a while, the openness of it. Is that why you came west?" "For the open spaces," Quinn's hands tightened on the reins. "Something like that." Adelina seemed to sense his reluctance to discuss his past. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "No need to apologize," Quinn said. "It's just, some stories are best left untold." "I understand," Adelina said softly. "We all have chapters we'd rather keep closed." They rode in companionable silence for a while until Adelina spoke again. "I've been thinking about what happens next. I can't impose on your kindness indefinitely." "You're not imposing," Quinn said quickly. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "That's very generous, but I need to make my own way eventually." Adelina smoothed her skirts. Perhaps there are opportunities in Cottonwood, a school that needs a teacher or a family that needs a governess. Quinn frowned. Cottonwood's pretty rough. Not many families looking for governesses. Then I'll find something else. I'm adaptable. Before Quinn could respond, the town came into view ahead of them. Cottonwood wasn't much to look at: a single main street with wooden buildings lining both sides, most of them weathered to a uniform gray. A few horses were hitched outside the saloon, and a couple of wagons stood in front of the general store. Quinn scanned the street carefully as they approached, alert for any sign of Adelina's brothers or their horses. Seeing nothing suspicious, he guided the wagon to a hitching post outside the general store. "Stay close," he reminded her as he helped her down from the wagon. "And remember, if you see your brothers, we leave immediately," Adelina finished for him. "I remember." Inside the general store, Quinn nodded to the proprietor, Samuel Wilkins, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers who'd run the store since before Quinn arrived in the area. "Quinn, good to see you," Wilkins called out. His eyebrows rose when he noticed Adelina. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "This is Miss Vaughn," Quinn said simply. "She's staying at my ranch for a time." Wilkins looked between them with undisguised curiosity, but Quinn offered no further explanation. In a place like Cottonwood, a woman staying with an unmarried man would certainly raise eyebrows, but Quinn had never much cared for local gossip. "Miss Vaughn is in need of some clothing and personal items," Quinn continued. "Perhaps you could assist her while I gather the supplies I need." Of course," Wilkins said, his merchant's instinct overriding his curiosity. "Right this way, Miss Vaughn. We just received a shipment of fabrics from back east that might interest you." As Adelina followed Wilkins to a section of the store that featured clothing and household goods, Quinn began collecting the items on his list. All the while, he kept one eye on the door and another on Adelina. He wasn't usually a nervous man, but something about this situation had him on edge. His instincts proved correct when the store's door swung open and Sheriff Thomas Baldwin entered. The sheriff was a large man with a drooping mustache and perpetually narrowed eyes that missed little. He nodded to Quinn before making his way over. "Quincannon," Baldwin greeted him. "Heard you might be in town today." Quinn continued selecting ammunition boxes. "News travels fast." "Small town," Baldwin replied with a shrug. "Also heard you might have company." His gaze drifted pointedly toward Adelina, who was examining a bolt of blue calico. Quinn set down the supplies he was holding and turned to face the sheriff fully. "Something on your mind, Sheriff," Baldwin lowered his voice. "Had 3 men in my office this morning, looking for their sister, said she was." He hesitated, "not right in the head, ran off yesterday." "Is that so?" Quinn's voice remained neutral, but his muscles tensed. "Said she might be in the company of a rancher. Described someone who sounds an awful lot like you." Baldwin studied Quinn's face. They seemed mighty concerned about her welfare. Quinn met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "Did they happen to mention how she got that cut on her face, or the bruises on her arms?" Baldwin's eyes flickered toward Adelina again. "They said she fell during a confused episode, that she's prone to accidents in her condition." "And you believed that?" The sheriff sighed, stroking his mustache. "I've known the Vaughn brothers since they moved here. They've had their share of trouble, but they're prominent landowners. Their word carries weight. More weight than the evidence of your own eyes," Quinn challenged. Baldwin had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Look, Quinn, I'm not saying I believe everything they told me, but this is a delicate situation. They're demanding I bring her back, claiming legal guardianship." "She's a grown woman, not a child," Quinn pointed out. "There's no law that says she has to live with her brothers if she doesn't want to." "No, there isn't," Baldwin agreed, "but there are laws about interfering in family matters." Quinn's jaw tightened. "There are also laws against assault, last time I checked." The sheriff held up his hands placatingly. "I'm just giving you a friendly warning. The Vaughns aren't men you want as enemies. They're talking about pressing charges against you kidnapping, if you can believe it." Quinn almost laughed at the absurdity. "They're welcome to try." "Don't be stubborn, Quinn. You're a good man, and I'd hate to see you in trouble over this. Why not let me talk to the lady, hear her side of things?" Quinn considered this for a moment. Baldwin wasn't a bad sort, just a man trying to keep the peace in a difficult environment. And Adelina would need to tell her story eventually if she was going to stay in the area. All right, Quinn conceded. But not here. Come out to the ranch tomorrow. She needs time to recover. Baldwin nodded. Fair enough, I'll ride out mid-morning. As the sheriff turned to leave, Quinn called after him quietly. Sheriff, if you happen to see the Vaughn brothers, you might remind them that threats only work on men who are afraid, and I stopped being afraid a long time ago. Baldwin shook his head. You're playing a dangerous game, Quinn. Not a game, Quinn corrected him. Just doing what's right. After the sheriff departed, Quinn finished gathering his supplies and joined Adelina, who was now selecting a modest wardrobe with Mrs. Wilkins' assistance. The storekeeper's wife had appeared from the back room and taken Adelina under her wing. You'll need at least 2 everyday dresses, Mrs. Wilkins was saying, and something nicer for Sundays, of course. Oh, and undergarments, stockings. Adelina looked somewhat overwhelmed, but she was smiling at the older woman's enthusiasm. When she noticed Quinn approaching, her expression turned questioning. Everything all right? She asked. I saw you speaking with the sheriff. We'll discuss it on the way back, Quinn said quietly. Are you finding everything you need? Mrs. Wilkins answered for her. We're managing just fine, Mr. Quincannon, though the poor dear came with so little. It's a good thing we just received that shipment from St. Louis. By the time they had completed their purchases, the wagon was loaded with supplies for the ranch and several parcels containing Adelina's new clothing and necessities. Quinn had insisted on paying, despite her protests. You can repay me once you're settled, he told her as they drove out of town. Consider it an advance on your wages if it makes you feel better. My wages? Adelina looked puzzled. You said you wanted to earn your keep. The ranch could use someone to manage the household. Pedro and I do our best, but... He gestured to his worn, patched shirt. As you can see, sewing isn't my strong suit. Adelina laughed, the sound light and musical. I'd be happy to help with that, but are you sure? Taking me in is one thing, but offering me employment. I'm sure, Quinn said firmly. Truth is, the place could use a woman's touch. Has for a long time. Once they were well away from town, Quinn told Adelina about his conversation with Sheriff Baldwin. Her face paled at the mention of her brother's accusations. They're claiming I'm insane, she whispered. That's monstrous. It's desperate, Quinn corrected. They know they have no real right to control you, so they're trying to discredit you instead. Baldwin's coming out to the ranch tomorrow to hear your side of things. Adelina's hands twisted in her lap. What if he doesn't believe me? He will, Quinn assured her. Baldwin's a reasonable man. And the evidence is on your side. He nodded toward her still visible injuries. Besides, I'll be there with you. Adelina looked at him with something like wonder. Why are you doing all this for me? You don't even know me. Quinn kept his eyes on the trail ahead. The truth was, he wasn't entirely sure himself. There was something about Adelina Vaughn that called to him, something beyond her beauty or her evident courage. Let's just say I know what it's like to need help and not have anyone to turn to, he said finally, and I made you a promise. Adelina's hand found his on the wagon seat, her touch light but warm. Yes, you did, and I believe you'll keep it. The simple faith in her voice stirred something deep inside Quinn, something he'd thought long buried. As they continued toward the ranch, the late afternoon sun gilding the mountains ahead, he found himself thinking not of the troubles that awaited them, but of possibilities he hadn't considered in years. When they arrived back at the ranch, Pedro came running out to greet them, his young face anxious. You are back. I was beginning to worry. We're fine, Pedro, Quinn assured him, handing the boy the reins. Just had more business in town than expected. As Pedro led the horses to the barn, Quinn helped Adelina down from the wagon. She winced slightly as her feet touched the ground. Are you hurt? Quinn asked, immediately concerned. Just sore, Adelina admitted. I'm not used to running for my life and then sitting on a wagon for hours. She attempted a smile, but Quinn could see the weariness in her eyes. Let's get you inside, he said. You can rest while Pedro and I unload. Inside the cabin, Adelina insisted on helping put away the supplies despite her fatigue. As they worked together in the small kitchen, Quinn found himself watching her movements. There was an efficiency to them, a grace that spoke of a woman accustomed to managing a household. "You mentioned your father was from Boston," Quinn said as they stored the flour and sugar in the pantry. "What did he do there?" "He was a professor of literature at Harvard," Adelina replied, her voice softening with memory. "He loved books more than anything, except perhaps my mother and me." "How did you end up in Montana Territory?" Adelina sighed, leaning against the pantry doorframe. "After Mother died, Father couldn't bear to stay in Boston. Too many memories," he said. He'd read about the opportunities in the West free land, open spaces. He had romantic notions about starting fresh. "It's a common dream," Quinn said. "Not always as easy as people imagine, though." "No, it isn't," Adelina agreed. "Father wasn't suited for frontier life. He tried to establish a school in the settlement near our homestead, but there wasn't much interest. Most families needed their children for farming and ranching." "And your brothers, were they professors too?" Adelina's expression darkened. "Hardly. Jasper, the eldest, worked as a dockhand in Boston. Nathan and Curtis followed him into that life. They were always rough, but out here—" She shook her head. Something about the lawlessness of the territory appealed to them. "They started drinking more, getting into fights. Father was ashamed of them." Quinn could well imagine the refined professor's dismay at his son's behavior, yet he brought them west with him. "They were family," Adelina said simply. "Father believed in second chances. He thought perhaps the responsibility of building something new would change them for the better. Instead, it made them worse," Quinn guessed. Adelina nodded. "After Father died, they showed their true colors. They'd been restraining themselves while he was alive, at least to some extent. But once he was gone—" Her voice trailed off. Quinn wanted to ask more, but he could see that the memories were painful. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "Thank you." Adelina pushed away from the doorframe. "Perhaps someday, but not today." By evening, the ranch had settled into a new routine. Pedro had brought in firewood and was now out checking on the livestock. Quinn sat at the table, his ledger open before him, calculating how many cattle he could afford to drive to market in the fall. And Adelina moved about the kitchen, preparing supper as though she'd been doing it there for years. The domesticity of the scene struck Quinn forcefully. His ranch had always been functional, a place of work and rest, but never truly a home. Now, with Adelina's presence, it felt different. He watched as she seasoned a pot of beans, her movements deft and assured. She'd changed into one of her new dresses, a simple calico in a shade of blue that complemented her auburn hair. The bruise on her arm was hidden now, but the cut on her cheek remained visible, a reminder of what she'd escaped. When she caught him looking, she smiled. "Penny for your thoughts, Mr. Quincannon." "Quinn," he corrected automatically. "Just thinking that you've made yourself at home quickly." "I hope that's all right," she said, suddenly uncertain. "I didn't mean to overstep." "No, no," Quinn assured her. "It's good, the place needed." He gestured vaguely. Someone who knows what they're doing in a kitchen." Adelina laughed. "From what I've seen of your pantry, you and Pedro have been surviving on beans, bacon, and coffee for quite some time." "The staples of a rancher's diet," Quinn said with a small smile. "Though I admit, whatever you're doing to those beans smells a lot better than my usual attempt." "Just a few herbs and a bit of the ham hock from the smokehouse," Adelina said. "Nothing fancy." They ate together when Pedro returned, the meal simple but flavorful. Quinn couldn't remember the last time food had tasted so good in his own home. After supper, as Adelina washed the dishes and Pedro dried, Quinn stepped outside onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black velvet of the sky like diamonds. In the distance, a wolf howled, and closer by, the horses nickered softly in the corral. He lit a cigarette, the match flaring briefly in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring Sheriff Baldwin, and with him, decisions that needed to be made. If Baldwin sided with the Vaughn brothers, things could get complicated. The door opened behind him, and Adelina stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. "May I join you?" she asked. Quinn nodded, moving over to make room for her on the porch step. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. "I'm nervous about tomorrow," Adelina admitted finally. "About seeing the sheriff." That's understandable, Quinn said, but remember Baldwin is fair-minded. He'll listen to what you have to say. What if he decides I should go back to my brothers? What if he believes their lies? Quinn turned to look at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. Then we'll deal with that when it comes, but I meant what I said yesterday. Your brothers won't touch you again, not while I'm around. Adelina studied his face. You're a mystery, Quinn Quincannon. Most men would have ridden past and minded their own business. Why did you stop to help me? Quinn took a long drag on his cigarette, considering his answer. I've seen enough injustice in my life to recognize it when I see it, he said finally. And I've walked away too many times when I should have stepped in. What happened? Adelina asked softly. In your past, I mean. Quinn was silent for so long that Adelina thought he wouldn't answer. When he did speak, his voice was low and rough. I was a lawman once, deputy marshal in Kansas, thought I was doing some good in the world. He flicked ash from his cigarette. Then one night, I was supposed to guard a woman accused of killing her husband. She claimed he beat her, that it was self-defense, but the judge was a friend of her husband's and everyone knew how the trial would end. Adelina said nothing, just listened as Quinn continued. She begged me to help her escape, said they'd hang her for sure if she went to trial. Quinn's face was tight with old regret. I told her the law had to take its course, that justice would prevail. What happened to her? Adelina asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. They found her hanged in her cell the next morning. She knew what was coming and took matters into her own hands. Quinn's cigarette had burned down to his fingers. He dropped it and crushed it under his boot. I quit that same day, couldn't stomach being part of a system that called that justice. I'm sorry, Adelina said, instinctively reaching for his hand. That must have been terrible for you. Quinn's fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused. It was a long time ago, but when I saw you running from your brothers, heard what they'd done to you. I suppose some part of me was trying to make it right. Adelina squeezed his hand. You did make it right, for me at least. They sat together in silence after that, hands still joined, each lost in their own thoughts as the moon climbed higher in the sky. Eventually, Adelina shivered in the night air. We should go in, Quinn said, reluctantly releasing her hand. Morning comes early on a ranch. As they stood, Adelina suddenly swayed, putting a hand to her head. Quinn caught her elbow to steady her. Are you all right? Just dizzy for a moment, Adelina said, blinking. I'm fine now. But Quinn could see she was pale even in the moonlight. When was the last time you had a proper meal before tonight, or a full night's sleep? Adelina gave a small laugh. I can't remember, before Father died, I suppose. Then you need rest more than anything, Quinn said firmly, guiding her back inside. Sheriff Baldwin can wait if need be. Inside, Pedro had already retired to his room. The cabin was warm and quiet, the fire burning low in the hearth. Quinn walked Adelina to the door of her room. Sleep as long as you need, he told her. There's no rush to rise with the dawn around here. Adelina hesitated at the threshold. Quinn? Yes, thank you for telling me about your past. I know it wasn't easy. Quinn nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Get some rest, Adelina. She smiled, the curve of her lips visible in the dim light from the main room. Good night, Quinn. As her door closed, Quinn stood for a moment, strangely reluctant to move away. Then, with a shake of his head, he retreated to his own room, wondering at the turn his solitary life had taken in just 2 days. Morning brought clear skies and the promise of another warm day. Quinn rose early as usual, but found to his surprise that Adelina was already up, her hair neatly braided, wearing one of her new dresses, a practical brown calico with small yellow flowers. You didn't have to get up so early, Quinn said as he entered the kitchen to find her frying bacon. I wanted to, Adelina replied, turning the bacon in the pan. I sleep better here than I have in months. Besides, I thought we should be prepared for the sheriff's visit. Quinn noticed that she'd not only made breakfast but had tidied the cabin as well. The usually cluttered table was clear and wiped clean, the floor swept, and even the curtains at the windows looked freshly shaken out. You've been busy, he observed. Adelina shrugged. I wanted to make a good impression on Sheriff Baldwin. I know appearances shouldn't matter, but... They do, Quinn finished for her, understanding her reasoning. A neat, well-kept home would suggest stability and normalcy, countering her brother's claims about her state of mind. Pedro joined them for breakfast, and afterward, Quinn took him aside while Adelina washed the dishes. "When the sheriff gets here, I want you to make yourself scarce," Quinn told the boy. "Not because I don't trust you," he added quickly when Pedro began to protest, "but because this situation could get complicated. The less you're involved, the better." Pedro clearly wasn't happy about it, but he nodded. "I will check the north pasture fences. They needed repair." "Good lad," Quinn said, clapping him on the shoulder. The sheriff arrived mid-morning as promised, his horse kicking up dust as he rode into the yard. Quinn met him outside, noting with relief that Baldwin was alone. "Sheriff," Quinn greeted him, stepping down from the porch. "Quinn," Baldwin returned, dismounting. "Miss Vaughn around, she's inside," Quinn confirmed. "Waiting to speak with you." Baldwin's eyes traveled over the ranch, taking in the well-maintained buildings and corrals. "Place looks good. You've done well for yourself out here." "I keep busy," Quinn said, recognizing the sheriff's attempt at casual conversation for what it was, an effort to gauge the situation before proceeding. Inside, Adelina stood as they entered, her hands clasped in front of her to hide their trembling. But her voice was steady as she greeted the sheriff. "Thank you for coming, Sheriff Baldwin. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you directly." Baldwin removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Miss Vaughn, you're looking well, considering the circumstances." "Please sit down," Adelina offered, gesturing to the table where she had laid out coffee and a plate of biscuits left from breakfast. As they settled around the table, Baldwin took out a small notebook and pencil. "Now, Miss Vaughn, I'd like to hear your version of events, if you don't mind." Adelina took a deep breath and began to speak. She told of her father's death, of her brother's increasing control and abuse, of their plan to marry her off against her will. She spoke clearly and calmly, though Quinn could see the effort it cost her to revisit these memories. When she pulled up her sleeve to show Baldwin the bruises on her arm, the sheriff's expression darkened. "Your brother did this to you?" he asked, examining the marks that were now turning yellow at the edges. "Jasper did, yes. When I refused to meet with Mr. Holcomb, the man they wanted me to marry. And the cut on your face, that was Nathan. 2 days ago, when I spilled coffee on his shirt by accident." Baldwin made notes as she spoke, his face giving away little of his thoughts. When Adelina finished her account, the sheriff sat back in his chair, tapping his pencil against the notebook. "That's quite a story, Miss Vaughn," he said finally, "and it paints a very different picture than what your brothers told me." "I'm not surprised," Adelina replied. "They've always been skilled at presenting themselves as respectable men to those in authority. But ask anyone who's done business with them, especially those with less power, hired hands, shopkeepers, women." Baldwin stroked his mustache, looking thoughtful. "The law gives me limited options here," he said. "Your brothers have no legal guardianship over you, that much is clear. You're a grown woman entitled to live where you choose." Quinn felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. "However," the sheriff continued, "if they press charges of kidnapping against Mr. Quincannon, that's another matter entirely. Even if such charges are baseless, they could make things difficult." "They wouldn't dare," Adelina said, her voice rising slightly. "They know I would testify against them, tell everyone what they've done." "Which might be exactly what they want to avoid," Baldwin pointed out. "Men like your brothers, they value their reputation in the community. Public accusations of abuse from their own sister could damage that, regardless of whether they're ever convicted." Quinn, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "What are you suggesting, Sheriff?" Baldwin sighed. "I'm suggesting that this situation needs to be resolved in a way that satisfies all parties. If Miss Vaughn wishes to remain here or anywhere else of her choosing, that's her right. But we need to ensure that her brothers accept that decision without causing further trouble." "And how do you propose we do that?" Quinn asked. The sheriff looked between them, his expression calculating. "The Vaughn brothers' main concern, as they expressed it to me, was propriety. A young, unmarried woman living alone or with an unmarried man raises eyebrows in these parts." Adelina stiffened. I won't go back to them just to satisfy society's expectations. No one's suggesting you should, Baldwin assured her, but there might be another solution. He hesitated, then added carefully, marriage has a way of settling these matters. A stunned silence followed his words. Quinn felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Marriage, the suggestion was so unexpected, so far from anything he had considered, that he couldn't form a coherent response. Adelina recovered first. Are you suggesting I should marry anyone just to escape my brother's control? Baldwin held up a placating hand. I'm merely pointing out that as a married woman, you would be legally beyond their reach. Your husband would have sole right to determine your living arrangements, not your brother's. That's barbaric, Adelina said, her voice tight with anger, exchanging one form of male control for another. Perhaps, Baldwin conceded, but it's the law as it stands. And sometimes, working within the system is the most practical solution. Quinn found his voice at last. There has to be another way, the sheriff turned to him. I'm open to suggestions, but keep in mind the Vaughn brothers aren't likely to give up easily. They strike me as men who don't like to lose. Adelina stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. I need some air, she said, her voice strained. Without waiting for a response, she hurried outside, the door closing firmly behind her. Quinn and Baldwin sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. You've put her in an impossible position, Quinn said finally, unable to keep the accusation from his voice. Baldwin shook his head. I've simply laid out the reality of the situation. You of all people should understand that, Quinn. You were a lawman once. Quinn's jaw tightened. How did you know that? Word gets around, even way out here. Baldwin leaned forward. Look, I'm not saying it's fair, but I've seen how these things play out. The Vaughns have money and influence. If they decide to make trouble, they can make life very difficult for both of you. Quinn stared at the sheriff, a thought slowly forming in his mind. It was crazy, impulsive, completely against his usual careful nature. But as he considered it, he realized it might be the only solution that would protect Adelina and allow her to remain free. I need to speak with Miss Vaughn, he said, standing. Alone, Baldwin nodded, reaching for his hat. I'll wait outside, but don't take too long. I need to report something back to the Vaughn brothers, or they'll likely ride out here themselves. Once the sheriff had stepped outside, Quinn went in search of Adelina. He found her behind the cabin, pacing back and forth, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the day. She looked up as he approached, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I won't do it, she said before he could speak. I won't marry some stranger just to satisfy propriety or appease my brothers. I understand, Quinn said, keeping his distance, giving her the space she clearly needed. And no one's going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. Then what are we going to do? Adelina asked, her voice catching. Because the sheriff's right about one thing, my brothers won't give up easily. They'll make trouble for you for helping me. Quinn took a deep breath. I have a suggestion, but I want you to understand that you're free to refuse and we'll find another way. Adelina stopped pacing, her gaze fixing on his face. What is it? Marry me. The words hung in the air between them, as startling to Quinn himself as they clearly were to Adelina, whose eyes widened in shock. What? She whispered. Quinn stepped closer, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Marry me, he repeated. Not for real or not in the way people usually think of marriage, but legally. It would solve the immediate problem. Your brothers would have no claim on you and no one could question your right to be here. Adelina stared at him, speechless for a moment. You would do that? Enter into a marriage of convenience with a woman you barely know? I would, Quinn said simply. As the sheriff pointed out, it's a practical solution, but marriage. Adelina shook her head, seemingly stunned by the proposal. That's a lifetime commitment. It doesn't have to be, Quinn assured her quickly. Once things settle down, once your brothers give up or move on, we could seek an annulment or a divorce. You'd be free to live as you choose. Adelina searched his face, looking for something deception, perhaps, or ulterior motives. But all she would find, Quinn knew, was his honest desire to help her. Why would you do this for me? She asked finally. Quinn hesitated, not entirely sure of the answer himself. Because it's the right thing to do, he said at last. Because you deserve a chance to live your life on your own terms, and because— He paused, struggling to articulate feelings he barely understood. Because in the short time you've been here, you've brought something to this place that was missing, something good. Adelina's expression softened. Quinn, you don't have to answer right away, he added hastily. Take some time to think about it, consider all your options. But Adelina was already shaking her head. There's nothing to think about. If this is what it takes to be truly free of my brothers, then yes, I'll marry you. Quinn blinked, surprised by her quick decision. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I'm sure, Adelina said firmly. As you said, it's a practical solution, and I trust you, Quinn. I don't know why after everything I've been through, but I do. The simple statement hit Quinn with unexpected force. Trust was not something he took lightly, nor something he often inspired in others. That this woman, who had every reason to distrust men, would place her faith in him felt like both a gift and a responsibility. Then we'll tell Baldwin, Quinn said, his voice steadier than he felt, and make arrangements. They found the sheriff by the corral, watching as Pedro exercised one of the horses. The boy had returned from his fence mending, unable to stay away with so much happening at the ranch. Baldwin turned as they approached, his eyebrows raising at their linked hands, a gesture neither Quinn nor Adelina had consciously initiated. Sheriff, Quinn began, we've reached a decision. Baldwin looked between them, a knowing expression crossing his weathered face. Have you now? Miss Vaughn and I will be married, Quinn stated. As soon as possible, the sheriff nodded slowly. I thought that might be the solution you'd come to. It's sensible given the circumstances. Can you perform the ceremony? Adelina asked. I can, Baldwin confirmed. It's within my authority as sheriff, especially out here where ordained ministers are scarce. He studied them for a moment longer. Are you both entering into this arrangement of your own free will? We are, they answered in unison. Then I'll make it official. Baldwin glanced at the sun, judging the time. I need to get back to town, but I can return tomorrow. Bring witnesses, you'll need at least 2. Pedro can be one, Quinn said. And perhaps Mrs. Wilkins from the general store. She seemed to take a liking to you, he added to Adelina. I'll stop by and ask her, Baldwin offered. Noon tomorrow then. As the sheriff mounted his horse to leave, he paused, looking down at them. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, both of you. He touched the brim of his hat. And I'll inform the Vaughn brothers of the development personally. Should be an interesting conversation. After Baldwin had ridden away, Quinn and Adelina stood in the yard, the reality of their decisions settling over them like a mantle. Well, Adelina said finally, a nervous laugh escaping her, I never imagined I'd be getting married like this. Quinn looked down at her, struck by how brave she was facing this unexpected turn of events, having second thoughts. No, Adelina said, meeting his gaze steadily. Are you? Quinn shook his head. No, but I want you to know that I meant what I said. This doesn't have to be a real marriage. You'll have your own room, your own privacy. Nothing will be expected of you that you don't freely choose. Adelina's cheeks colored slightly, but her voice remained composed. Thank you for that, though I have to say, as arrangements go, this one doesn't seem so terrible. She glanced around at the ranch, the mountains beyond. There are worse places to find oneself married. Quinn couldn't help but smile at that. I suppose there are. Pedro approached them cautiously, having overheard enough to realize something significant had occurred. Are you really getting married? He asked, his young face alight with curiosity. Quinn and Adelina exchanged a glance. We are, Quinn confirmed. Tomorrow at noon. And we'd like you to be a witness if you're willing. Pedro's expression transformed into a wide grin. Of course, this is wonderful news. His enthusiasm was so genuine, so uncomplicated, that Quinn felt a twinge of guilt for the pragmatic nature of the arrangement. But then he looked at Adelina and saw her smiling at Pedro's reaction, and the guilt faded. Whatever their reasons, if this marriage brought some happiness into their lives, so much the better. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of preparations. The ranch needed to be made presentable for the ceremony, modest though it would be. Pedro threw himself into the tasks with energetic dedication. mucking out the barn, sweeping the yard, and even attempting to polish the tarnished silver candlesticks that had belonged to Quinn's mother, the only family heirloom he possessed. Adelina, meanwhile, set about turning the simple cabin into a home worthy of a wedding. She aired out quilts, arranged wildflowers in jars on the table, and baked bread and a small cake with the supplies they had on hand. Quinn found himself relegated to hunting duties, tasked with bringing home something special for their wedding supper. He rode out with his rifle, glad for the chance to gather his thoughts alone. As he tracked a deer through the piney woods that bordered his property, Quinn reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. 5 days ago, he had been a solitary rancher, content with his quiet existence. Now he was about to be a married man, tied to a woman he barely knew, for reasons that had nothing to do with love or desire. And yet, as he thought of Adelina, her courage, her quiet dignity, the way she had already begun to transform his Spartan home into something warm and inviting, he couldn't bring himself to regret the decision. The deer appeared in a clearing ahead, a young buck with a modest rack. Quinn raised his rifle, sighted carefully, and squeezed the trigger. The animal dropped instantly, a clean kill. As he field-dressed the deer, Quinn found himself hoping that this marriage, though begun in unusual circumstances, might bring both him and Adelina a measure of peace neither had known for a long time. By the time he returned to the ranch with the dressed deer draped over his saddle, the sun was beginning to set. The cabin glowed with lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney. Through the window, Quinn could see Adelina and Pedro working together in the kitchen, their movements easy and familiar, as though they'd been doing this for years instead of days. A strange feeling washed over Quinn as he dismounted, not exactly happiness, but something adjacent to it. A sense of rightness, perhaps, of coming home to something more than just shelter. When he entered the cabin with his prize, Adelina looked up from the dough she was kneading, her face flushed from the heat of the stove. "You were successful, I see," she said, smiling. "Venison steaks for tomorrow's supper," Quinn confirmed, unable to resist returning her smile. "And plenty left to smoke for winter." "It's a good omen," Pedro declared confidently. "A successful hunt on the eve of your wedding." Quinn and Adelina exchanged an amused glance at the boy's superstition, but neither contradicted him. In a land as harsh as Montana territory, people took their good omens where they found them. Later, after the deer had been properly hung and Pedro had retired for the night, Quinn and Adelina sat together on the porch steps, much as they had the night before. But tonight there was a new awareness between them, a consciousness of the step they were about to take. "Are you nervous?" Quinn asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Adelina considered the question. "Less than I would have expected," she admitted, "though I keep thinking how strange it is. A week ago I was living in fear, trapped in my brother's house. Tomorrow I'll be a married woman." She shook her head in wonder. Life can change so quickly. "It certainly can," Quinn agreed, thinking of his own life's unexpected turns. "What about you?" Adelina asked. "Are you having any regrets?" Quinn looked at her in the moonlight, her profile delicate against the darkness. "No," he said honestly, "no regrets." Adelina turned to face him fully. "Quinn, there's something I need to say about tomorrow, about our arrangement." "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I want you to know that I don't view this marriage as merely a convenient legal fiction. I respect you and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. I'll do my best to be a good wife in all the ways that matter." Quinn's heart quickened at her words. "Adelina, you don't owe me anything. I meant what I said earlier." She placed a finger against his lips, silencing him. "I know what you said, and I appreciate it more than I can express, but I want you to understand that I'm entering into this with open eyes and an open heart. Whatever comes, we'll face it together, as partners." Quinn caught her hand as she lowered it, holding it gently between his own. "Partners," he repeated, liking the sound of it. "I can agree to that." For a moment they sat there, hands joined, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them. Then, with a small smile, Adelina withdrew her hand and stood. "I should get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will be a big day." Quinn watched her go inside, feeling strangely optimistic about the future for the first time in longer than he could remember. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as though nature itself approved of the day's proceedings. Quinn woke early as usual but found Adelina already up and about, her movements betraying a nervous energy despite her calm demeanor. "Good morning," she greeted him, pouring coffee into a cup and handing it to him. "I hope you slept well." Quinn accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Well enough, on and off," Adelina admitted. "I kept thinking about today." Quinn studied her over the rim of his cup. She looked beautiful in the morning light, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes bright with anticipation or nerves, perhaps both. "It's not too late to change your mind," he offered quietly. "We could find another solution," but Adelina shook her head firmly. "No, this is the right path, I'm certain of it." Relief flooded through Quinn at her words, stronger than he expected. "Then we proceed as planned." They spent the morning in final preparations. Quinn shaved carefully, then donned his best shirt, a dark blue cotton that he usually saved for trips to town. He even polished his boots, an activity that prompted a raised eyebrow from Pedro. "What?" Quinn asked defensively. "It's my wedding day." Pedro grinned. "I've never seen you so concerned with your appearance before, that's all." Meanwhile, Adelina had closeted herself in her room with the nicest of her new dresses, a dove gray cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Wilkins had helped her select it, declaring it perfect for a bride who wants to be practical but still look special. Shortly before noon, the sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of Sheriff Baldwin and Mrs. Wilkins. Quinn went out to greet them, suddenly feeling as nervous as a young boy at his first dance. "Quinn," Baldwin said, dismounting, "everything ready." "As ready as it can be," Quinn replied. Mrs. Wilkins bustled forward, a covered basket on her arm. "I've brought a few things," she announced. No bride should be without something special on her wedding day, however modest the ceremony. Quinn thanked her, touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. He led them inside, where Pedro had set up the main room as best he could for a wedding. The table had been pushed against the wall, the floor swept clean, and Adelina's wildflowers arranged in jars on every available surface. "It looks lovely," Mrs. Wilkins declared, setting down her basket and immediately beginning to unpack it. "Now, where is the bride?" As if on cue, Adelina's door opened and she stepped into the main room. Quinn felt his breath catch in his throat. She was beautiful in the gray dress, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Mrs. Wilkins had included a small posy of white wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon, which Adelina now held in her hands. "You look beautiful, my dear," Mrs. Wilkins said, rushing forward to adjust a strand of Adelina's hair. "Doesn't she, Mr. Quincannon?" Quinn found his voice with difficulty. "She does indeed." Adelina met his eyes across the room, a small, shy smile playing at her lips. For a moment, everyone else seemed to fade away, and it was just the two of them, standing on the precipice of a new life together. Then Sheriff Baldwin cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Shall we begin?" They gathered in the center of the room, Quinn and Adelina facing each other with Baldwin between them. Pedro and Mrs. Wilkins stood to either side as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and simple, as befitted a frontier wedding. Baldwin spoke the traditional words, asking if they took each other in matrimony, to which they each responded with a clear, "I do." Quinn had managed to procure a plain gold band from the general store's small selection of jewelry, which he now placed on Adelina's finger. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana," Baldwin concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." He glanced at Quinn with a hint of amusement. "You may kiss your bride." Quinn had not considered this part of the ceremony. He looked at Adelina uncertainly, not wanting to presume, but she stepped forward, tilting her face up to his in clear invitation. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, intending a brief, chaste kiss. But the moment their lips met, something changed. What began as a formality deepened into something real and warm, lasting several heartbeats longer than either had anticipated. When they parted, Quinn was surprised to see a flush on Adelina's cheeks that matched the warmth he felt in his own. Their eyes held for a moment, a silent communication passing between them. Pedro broke the moment with enthusiastic applause, quickly joined by Mrs. Wilkins, who was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Well," Baldwin said, signing the marriage certificate with a flourish, "that's official." "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Quincannon, Mrs. Adelina Quincannon." The name hung in the air, new and startling to both of them, yet somehow not unwelcome. The rest of the afternoon passed in a small but joyful celebration. Mrs. Wilkins had brought a bottle of good whiskey and a larger cake than Adelina had been able to manage with the ranch's limited supplies. They ate and drank and shared stories, the atmosphere warm and convivial. As the sun began to set, Baldwin and Mrs. Wilkins prepared to depart. "Before I go," the sheriff said, drawing Quinn aside, "you should know that I spoke with the Vaughn brothers yesterday, as promised." Quinn tensed. "How did they take the news?" Baldwin grimaced. "Not well, especially the eldest Jasper." "Made some threats, but nothing specific enough that I could act on. Just be on your guard, Quinn. Men like that don't like to lose." Quinn nodded grimly. "I figured as much. Thanks for the warning." After their guests had departed with final congratulations and good wishes, Quinn, Adelina, and Pedro sat down to the wedding supper of venison steaks, fresh bread, and the last of Mrs. Wilkins' cake. "To the new Mrs. Quincannon," Pedro said, raising his cup of cider in a toast. "May you bring much happiness to this house." "And to you, Pedro," Adelina returned, touched by the boy's sentiment, "for welcoming me so warmly." Quinn watched them, these two people who had somehow become his family in the space of a week. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Later, after Pedro had gone to bed, Quinn and Adelina faced each other in the main room, the reality of their new situation suddenly looming large between them. "Well," Quinn said, feeling unaccountably awkward, "it's been quite a day." "It has," Adelina agreed. She twisted the new ring on her finger, still getting used to its presence. "I never imagined my wedding would be like this, but I wouldn't change it." Quinn was surprised by her words. "No," Adelina shook her head. "It was honest, and it was among friends." "That's more than many marriages begin with." Quinn couldn't argue with that. "Still, it's not the usual way of things." "No," Adelina admitted. "It isn't." She hesitated, then added, "Quinn, about tonight. I know we agreed that this marriage would be in name only, at least to begin with." Quinn nodded, uncertain where she was going with this. "That's right, nothing has to change in that regard." Adelina took a step closer to him. "What if I want something to change? Not everything, not all at once, but something?" Quinn's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Adelina said softly, "that while I'm not ready for all that marriage traditionally entails, I don't want to sleep alone tonight, not on my wedding night." She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "Would you hold me? Just hold me." Quinn felt a surge of tenderness so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "I would be honored," he said, his voice rough with emotion. That night, for the first time, they shared a bed, Quinn's, as it was the larger of the two. They lay together under the quilts, Adelina's head on Quinn's chest, his arm around her shoulders. It was innocent, yet profoundly intimate in a way that transcended physical desire. As Adelina's breathing deepened into sleep, Quinn stared up at the darkened ceiling, marveling at the strange and unexpected path that had led him here. A week ago, he had been alone, content in his solitude. Now he was a married man, with a woman he barely knew yet felt inexplicably connected to sleeping in his arms. Life, Quinn reflected as sleep finally claimed him, had a way of surprising even the most cautious of men.